The 5 Scottish Labour MPs who signed a letter backing cuts to disability benefits in support of a better working Britain might be pleased with themselves and think they've crawled a wee bit further up the greasy pole of the Labour Party. But by gum, if I know any Scots, I think they've just torpedoed themselves in the eyes of most decent people. So that's one big talking point in today's podcast. Of course, there's the rest. What is going on in America at the moment? Is there an actual active pushback against Donald Trump, or is that wishful thinking on our part, standing by and watching? We talk as well about the nuclear debate and whether or not Faslane is in play, whether or not it's, as its proponents admit, is essentially a system that is dependent on access to an American missile system that could be withheld at any time. We talk also about the Michael Sheen documentary and his efforts to highlight the practice of loan sharking and how there is nothing coming to the rescue for those on low pay. Those are the headlines. Now for the podcast.
Hi, chums, and I'm going to keep that bit in, that little laugh at the beginning, because fundamentally, as Lesley and I were just saying there, at this stage of the week, you know, and it comes to a Tuesday. Oh, by the way, hi, chums, and welcome to this week's Lesley podcast. I've got going through my head on a loop is Edinny Ken, about there's so many things happening. But one thing I do ken, it was absolutely stonking day on Saturday, and it got to 13 degrees in the sun, and it being Dundee, that immediately led to T-shirts and shorts. You know, people about T-shirts and shorts.
So, come on, people. Are we saying people with the shorts?
Yeah, well, men.
Honestly, it's a total baffling thing to me. But okay, in that I sort of, you know, every week go and plunge into water that's currently 4 degrees. I don't think I'm in any position to sort of, you know, do the weird thing. But still, men shorts in cold weather, fine.
Well, they reckoned it was sweltering. They reckon it was sweltering at 13 degrees with that sun splitting the pavements as a, yeah. But anyway, yes, but one thing I do care about is, and I just said this as we were coming on there, the current iteration of the Labour Party are a shower of bastards. That's it. Yeah. That's it. I mean, that's it. That's the end of the Lesley Rigger podcast.
Is it? Because with that word, have we just been removed from the airwaves or anything? No.
Well, no. We put it up on. We put it up on saying contains curse words.
Oh, okay, right.
Absolutely fine.
So we've been constraining ourselves for no particular reason.
No, for no particular reason.
I thought we were taken off the air. Have we said anything
untoward? No. Oh, we can actually even say lots of worser words than that, as much.
Worser words. Jeez,
worser words than that, if we so desire.
Well,
but yes,
okay,
I mean,
the sentiment is, the main point. It's like, what the actual, and I'm not going to say it, but still,
no,
Jesus. And actually, last night I was watching Scotland Tonight, and there's a woman on who'd been the Conservative leader of Borders Council. I think she now works for a charity, and she basically had, you know, jaw on the ground and just said, you know, this is. She said Labour is now like the Conservatives, and everybody was a bit okay. There's many ways you could go with that, but this is unbelievable, and also. Yeah, I mean, it is just jaw-dropping. If people don't know, this is the projection of £6 billion being cut off the benefits bill. Of course, you know, as things stand at the moment, they've just sort of leaked that amount out. There's been a sort of suggestion that the big clampdown will be trying to get people with disabilities into work. So, you know, one change would be to personal independence payments. Actually, Shona Craven went through that very well in Scotland Tonight, that change, and just kind of made the point about how many people are actually in work that claim this. But also just the level of money that's being paid on this is kind of pitiful. And she also made a point about universal credit being so crap in every single way that it kind of throws people into all sorts of difficulties. And very possibly, if you finally get through that you claim and are accepted for universal credit, you're just not going to fiddle with anything because it'll have taken you ages to get the assessment in the first place. There's just so much wrong with it. But the thing that was, to me, was completely jaw-dropping was this guy. I'm having to look up his name because all these new Labour MPs in Scotland are kind of, just as you said earlier, don't ask me because dinna ken. This guy was Graham Downey. I think he's a Labour MP for somewhere around Edinburgh or something, Lothians. And I mean, Colin Mackay is quite a ferocious, interviewer, but even he couldn't get the guy to say anything. He just came on. There's 5 of them have written a letter. As far as I can see, they're just big sooks, since we're now calling a spade, trying to say, yeah, the need to completely radically reform the benefit system is important for working people. I mean, it's almost like you could almost have a Scrabble game based on Labour bullshit bingo, where you just, I got one in, I got another one. Look, I got a whole sentence of bullshit Labour bingo. So he basically just managed to talk nonsense, really, for about 4 or 5 minutes. And of course, managed anytime he was being pinned down on, do you support disabled people having their benefits cut if they are not able to go back to work? He was able to, of course, play as, but that particular proposal hasn't been proposed yet. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if this is a big effort by Labour to just see what level of pushback they get. And they've got their lieutenants out trying to, just kind of push it out. But then if they get too much flack, they can just jump behind the shield. But really, I mean, the sense they got from the interviewer and then the panel that had it afterwards was just, absolutely jaw-dropping. Neil Finlay, a former Labour MSP, but don't think he would, well, I'm sure, I don't even know if he is a member of the Labour Party anymore, but was just absolutely vitriolic in the kind of, how dare Graham Downey come out with any of this kind of crap? So it's I don't have to pull me language back now. I've sort of lent into the swearies, but yeah, it's unbelievable, and it won't work. It won't save money. It isn't getting to the bottom of any of the problems. As someone rightly remarked on an article in the National, half of the problem for universal credit is that it's supplementing employers who are paying livable wages. So, if you're really going to have a radical reform of something, this is just such a small part of what you want to look at.
Well, that was the key point, because I'm going to name the rest of them. This is the Get Britain Working Group, 5 Scottish Labour MPs, Graham Downey, the aforementioned, Blair McDougall. There's a shock, eh? We never thought Blair would be sucking up to the party leadership. Frank McNally, Gregory Poynton, and Joni Reid. McDougall's the only one I'd ever heard of. And I read their statement, and it is full of cliches and mealy-mouth excuses, talking about you're going to this is a truly necessary and truly progressive achievement they're going to have to do in reforming the welfare system. They're going to transform it, one built on employment that refuses to accept worklessness as inevitable, and it says it's going to be providing opportunities, because that's the whole thing. What they're going to do is they're going to make personal independence payment, PIP, harder to qualify for. So they're going to save $5 billion on that, making it harder to qualify for personal independent payments, which is help with extra living costs if you have long-term physical or mental health conditions or disabilities. Now, the monumental amounts of money, you get £74 a week just under on the standard rate PIP, the enhanced rate £110 a week. So that's going to be who they're going to be hitting. People with physical and mental disabilities. And I mean, and I read through the list, and I'm not going to read them out. It's a comprehensive list of people with cognitive disabilities and physical disabilities that actually stop them from living properly, help with being dressed, help with eating, help with reading. The mobility can be the fact if you can't go out on your own, again, if you've got cognitive issues. And you're thinking that's the monumental amounts of money. And what we've actually got going on there, and it links to me with the let's cut foreign aid to spend on defence, what we're actually setting up here, because they're going to be freezing PIP next year. It's not going to rise in line with inflation, and they're going to raise the universal lousy rate, but the basic rate, whilst they're freezing the rate for PIP. So what you've got going on here, as I say, when you look at the foreign aid, is they're setting up our own personal security versus them foreigners that we're sending money to. And secondly here, it's dividing and ruling between people in work and people who cannot work because of mental and physical disabilities. And it goes back to that common sense thing I found over a number of years, that people do get angry about seeing someone, as Liz Kendall would say, taking the mickey by what they believe being unfairly on social security benefits, etc., down the road, not going out to work. And they're on a rotten minimum wage piece of employment. And they're setting that division up rather than looking at the big issue is why don't we actually tax multi-millionaires and billionaires and companies properly? And why do we spend so many billions that we'll be talking about later on nuclear weapons when we could be transferring our economy and transferring and redistributing wealth and income through a properly funded tax system? But no, they're not going to do that. Let's tackle people who cheat on benefits, which is a minuscule amount, and let's hurt the most vulnerable in our society whilst veiling it in this whole thing of compassion and getting people back into work. For God's sake, if people could work, the vast, vast majority of them, they definitely would. And it just seems unnecessary, cruel. And this is Liz Kendall, the woman who stood on that platform against Ed Miliband and talked about the work shy and talked about being harder on welfare reform than the Tories, who got a grand total of 4% when she stood for leadership of the Labour Party.
Yeah, yeah. And actually, if we're going down memory lane, all of this just reminds me so much of when the Tories brought in these kind of attempts to, this has happened so many times with even more vicious people, although, I'd give you that. I wouldn't have an argument with Liz Kendall easily. But do you remember where they had stuff where they were trying to make people walk, to sort of test whether or not they could actually, how far they could walk?
Yeah.
I mean, that sticks so much in my mind of just, the indignity of the whole thing. And it stays with, I think it will stay with a lot of people, this trying to fiddle around with testing people who've got disabilities. I mean, it's just disgusting, actually. But anyway, good luck to them here, because all this tomorrow belongs to me language may work for some sort of, somebody who's stuck in a kind of permanent sort of, I don't know, survey group in their head or something. Mm-hmm. But for most people listening to this, the very use of the language actually is the warning. It is all of that. It's not calling a spade a spade. It's absolutely talking about how everything's going to be better when we, liberate everyone to go to. Let's not take the analogy too far. But, there have been entire regimes built around how useful work can be to freedom. It's just the language around this is disgusting. And I think in Scotland, they will have to go some to come up with any kind of rationale for this. Anyway.
Yeah, because Starmer's quotes, people who really need that safety net, still not always getting the dignity they deserve. We believe in the dignity of work and the dignity of every worker. If you can work, we will make work pay. Yeah, so Keir, let's just actually analyse it. As Lesley just said there, 40% of folk receiving universal credit are in work. So we're funding lousy pay at work. So let's tackle that, shall we? Yeah, before we actually start taking money away from people on personal independence payments. What I actually did as well, there was an opinion poll came out, run by Opinion, literally just after the defence statement last week. And what they said that people supported increasing defence spending, 60% did that. They believe 44% of people, which was up by 4%, believed that should be funded by cutting spending. 2/3 of those who believe that the spending should be cut believe it should be cut through, international aid. And 60% of Labour voters agree with it, 77% of Tories agreed with that, and 86% of Reform voters believed in that. 1/3 believed that the defence spending should be done through cutting welfare and benefit. And 70% of that believe there should be unemployment benefit that should be cut. So there you go. The 44% of those surveyed believe there should be spending cuts, and 60% of those, 2/3 should be through international aid, and 60% of Labour voters believe that. That still leaves a significant number of Labour supporters. When you actually take that 44% and 2/3 of those, which is 33%, 6/10 of that, it's only about 20% of Labour Party supporters believe in cutting international aid. So, I mean,
but still, this is the thing is, if people keep, I wrote a column
Yeah.
about this, really, about just how all of this
Yeah.
is being framed. And if you frame this that the only way you can increase defence spending in the light of what's happening at the moment is by raiding a different pot, then it is just a question of who are the least deserving, most vulnerable, expendable, and that's the way the mind thinks. So that where we've got to now is kind of almost the shadow of Trump pushing straight into our politics, so that we have adopted a dog eat dog sort of approach. And then, of course, kindness just looks weak. Solidarity looks stupid. I don't know if people are now getting to the stage where they think that Putin is kind of sexy. I don't think we've quite got, the shadow hasn't reached that far. But politics is just deal making. So as long as we've got, when you start to think like that, of course you're going to end up having all sorts of opinion poll results like that. Something that struck me really strongly when I was just writing this column yesterday, it was a small piece that had been tweeted by the BBC's economics guy, Faisal Islam, pointing out that the Germans had just done something unbelievable in terms of their history, which was they had just, it may not sound like much here, they had basically moved to exempt spending on defence and infrastructure from the debt brake, which was a set of borrowing rules that were actually put into the German constitution, no less, by Angela Merkel. So the Germans have been known for being, these are the really fiscal prudent guys that keep, that keep a very balanced budget, albeit they absolutely have expanded, to kind of export most of their material across half of Europe and the rest of the world. So they've done pretty well out of it all. But this has changed. I mean, in the same way as their new, almost imminent new Chancellor Merz has come in with a very different approach to Putin generally, they're coming in and saying that fundamentally all the expenses in their defence budget above 1% of GDP will be exempted from the national debt brake. So that basically if NATO wants everyone to spend 3%, 88 billion euros will be exempted from counting towards their national debt by the Germans. And they've tossed into that basket a special infrastructure fund to, quote, fix our outdated infrastructure. Now, if anybody's been in Germany lately, you might find that kind of surprising. Old infrastructure, right? So they're going to spend 500 billion euros over 10 years, and that's with no cuts to welfare spending. So, they're going to fix their trains, autobahns, trams, publicly owned water and sewerage systems, district heating networks and such like. Wow. And, so they're basically saying we see the problem that if we're going to end up crippling our own economy by trying to take money out of it to, fund what will have to be a really massive step change in defence, we will be screwed. Everybody will be. So we're not going to do it. And I am no economist, as you will know, but, there's quite a number of other countries looking at this as a means to sort of expand the money available to them for defence. And just while we're at it, in Germany, the lender, the 16 federal states in Germany, they're in this exemption from the debt brake as well. It will produce an extra 15 billion euros of spending this year for councils, again, without any cuts to welfare spending. So I'm not saying, it's a weird one when you're sitting here kind of saying a conservative German chancellor is kind of something to have a look at. But everybody who knows about these things was saying last week that describing this as a tectonic spending shift in Germany, which would actually set a template for other European nations. And meanwhile, we're listening to Rachel Reeves insist that benefits and international aid must go to boost defence spending, which is kind of, where is the public debate on this? It just seems to me this is massive. There was that day, there was the former Lib Dem leader, Vince Cable, and jings, when you're down to the Lib Dems, but you know what I mean. Yeah. But that's another point. This is the reason we're not getting a proper debate, is because we've got Tories who would have done who've tried to do this anyway as the opposition. So they're hardly going to shine a light unless it's to say, oh, look, there's some wee corner with disabled folk there. You didn't catch them, mate. So it's hardly, you're only going to get much opposition from them. The Lib Dems get 2 questions a week at Prime Minister's questions. The SNP, obviously, who would have got wellied in, are kind of nowhere now. So this is as good as it gets. But anyway, Vince Cable, Radio 4, said to the Chancellor, forget the foolish pledge not to raise taxes. We're now in a national emergency with services squeezed to the bone. We need a radical and honest conversation that involves ditching the pre-election commitments on borrowing, debt, the whole lot. And it won't happen. And it won't happen because just what you said at the very beginning of this, the extent of which vulnerable looking person will we hit hard first will be the shape of the conversations that we're having. And anybody who tries to kind of say this is just too narrow a thing will get shot down because it will feel that that's irrelevant.
Yeah, I'm just intrigued to see what rebellion, if any, there will be amongst Labour ranks. I noticed that Brian Leishman has stood up again and said this is intolerable. It's absolutely ridiculous that foreign aid should be cut, and it's ridiculous that welfare spending should be cut in order to fund defence spending. So Brian is out there saying it, but I just wonder again, because we've seen this, how many times we've seen it, Lesley, there's going to be a Labour rebellion. There's going to be a Labour rebellion. And it just doesn't happen.
Do you remember, who was it, Richard Wynne-Jones that we interviewed,
Yes.
Remember, from Wales? Yeah. And I mean, it really stays with me, that analysis of his, that it may be changing, but still, that Welsh Labour basically did well when it stood up to London, even when there was a Labour government, whereas the Scots were always, almost cannon fodder, pretty much, right down the line. One other thing that struck me about the debate as it's happening at the moment is that last week sometime there was quite a bit of a flurry about the idea that health-related benefit spending had really soared in Britain and had risen much higher than it had in any other country. And I did have a wee look at that. It has soared to 1.7% of GDP. The OECD average is 1.6%. So, it's soared to getting to pretty much where everybody else was anyway. There was a guy from the Institute for Fiscal Studies who, this is one of the reasons given why has there been this soaring. He said, yep, COVID, cost of living crisis, that explains probably quite a lot of it. But interestingly, and this is his quote, he said, these shocks have an outsized effect in the UK because of difficulties accessing NHS treatment and the relatively low level of basic unemployment support in the UK. So it's kind of like this is just an endless vortex of kind of you don't produce a safety net, people fall through, they then get into a worse situation that demands spending. You decide they look a bit wobbly and vulnerable, you cut it. And we know how this will work. This unvirtuous circle will just keep happening until we are able to have a proper discussion about whether we want to do what Denmark and all these other countries do, where they just say, we want a proper social welfare safety net. And actually better than that, something where there's an expectation that you're an okay person, you'll get back on your feet, but here's all the support you get and you don't have a time limit on it. If we want to have that, we can't have that within a British context. It's just not possible.
Yeah. And they're going on about the dignity of work. The dignity of work. I mean, has anyone actually stepped back and actually done the analysis of the amount of mental health issues and even physical health issues that arise from an unhealthy workplace in terms of its atmosphere, in terms of the working practices? How much work has been done on that? And it just seems to me that, again,
there's so much double standards. I was watching Channel 4 News last night, and Gary Gibbons had a really fascinating. He trotted along to see Reform's new offices somewhere in the city of London, on the top floor, and it was a very good interview. He spent a long time actually kind of wandering around and letting Nigel Farage, bleat on basically, But there was a point, the same thing happened where Farage starts going on about, and enough of these 4-day weeks, all this woke nonsense, and everyone should get back to the office and do the 9 to 5, do 9 to 6 or whatever. And Gary Gibbons said, what, and no time for pub lunches? you know, and sort of
Yeah.
at least Farage had the grace to sort of like, yeah, you got me there, sort of smile, which of course is part of the attraction, I'm sure, for him, is that he did so go, okay, gotcha. He didn't try to kind of go all po-faced and wriggle his way out of it. So I don't know how much any of this stuff ever lands on him. But still, it's that sort of totally one rule for.
Oh well, that's the other thing. I mean, I mean, it's like the raising of the pension age. I mean, yeah, terrific if you're sitting at a very nicely paid vocational piece of employment, as opposed to somebody working on an assembly line or a firefighter, police officer, prison officer. People actually, working with their hands and doing hard manual physical labour. And it is that whole thing as well of the amount of poverty is at the root of so much of this, is the fact of bad wages and people struggling economically, and that grind that actually doesn't affect people themselves, but actually passed on generationally, even within the womb in terms of health and expectations. I mean, it's just, and that's well attested to of the generational passing on of the impact of poverty in terms of health and physical and mental down generations of families. But again, let's not tackle that, as you said. No, let's hit the poorest and most vulnerable people at home and abroad in order to fund the defence spending.
And just, I don't know if this is where this was ever going to come in, but it seems quite relevant, is the Michael Sheen documentary.
Yeah.
Because this was about tackling essentially people that are so desperate that they've resorted to all sorts of payday loans and loan sharks, basically, and the fact that banks just don't want to know at all. And I watched that, and we'll come to the content of the documentary in a minute, but I mean, it's absolutely his point, and the point behind it was that people may think, oh, why can't these people manage whatever? That actually banks will charge people far more if they look like they're in any way poor, let's just say. So that it's the point that you made earlier. He was saying, if I got into a situation myself where I had to borrow money, I would be paying a tiny interest rate on it. Whereas the people who need it most will end up paying a massive one. And the documentary was, I think it won't come as a shock to anybody to realize that this is the kind of stuff that's going on the whole time. But the importance of the film and so on was, for him, were twofold. One was to get the stories of people who just could be you. They're absolutely straight up people doing huge amounts of work with something like £12,000 debts that are saying that one day they hope they might be able to save for a deposit on a house. And you're seeing as they say it, they don't believe that will ever happen. So it's like, and it's sort of, it was almost embarrassing to watch the exchanges with people that were just in such a, well, you'd have to be in a bit of a state of denial to be able to pucker up and keep going, actually. But the point of this whole thing was that Michael Sheen took 100,000 quid of his own money to write off £1 million of debt. And you can do that because there's a stage when people have debt, the institutions or whatever that have issued it get sort of fed up chasing it, and they'll sell it on to a secondary set of debt collectors for a lot less than it was worth in the first place. And yet to the person who has the debt, it never changes. So that's how he thought it was possible. And as it turns out, there's a tremendous piece in The Guardian about this. I'll put the thing in the link, where he watched this same sort of idea happening in the States in 2016, actually, and thought, I wonder if that could work. So at the time, he set up the End High Cost Credit Alliance, and has been slowly working his way up through to thinking, how could we actually do this? So this was the moment where he put, and people might think, I mean, when you're watching it, you're thinking, jings, I didn't think he had 100,000 readies, all the way through it. You are kind of slightly thinking, how much more has he got? I mean, it's just extraordinary. But when you read what has actually happened to Michael Sheen, it is kind of fascinating. And I probably knew bits of it, but hadn't got it all together in my head, because he was, everyone will know he did very well. He was in various films. He moved to Hollywood. He was Happy Larry. It was all fine. He then actually decided to move back to Port Talbot, where he, grew up. And that's when he started to kind of get very involved in social causes and so on. And he backed the 2019 Homeless World Cup, where Cardiff had bid to host the tournament, which was going to bring together 500 players from 50 countries, all of whom had experienced homelessness. But the funding fell through despite him selling his houses in Los Angeles and Wales to pay for it. So basically, he was himself in massive debt. And apparently, somehow, he's still paying it off. Now, that does confuse me because I don't know how you have 100,000 readies and still be paying off debt, but still, whatever. So it's been quite a sort of, quite an epoch sort of ending thing for him to get to the stage where he's just become a different kind of person, according to his own perception of things. He declared himself a not-for-profit actor that some people might remember a couple of years ago. And he's now in the video, the documentary describes his efforts to try and get a Fair Banking Act passed in Britain. He tried to contact several times, every bank, no one replied to him. Labour and Tories, nobody replied to him. Then he decided to go and have a meeting with Gordon Brown, where Gordon Brown basically said, don't you worry, pal, I'll get this through to the right people. And the documentary ends with none of that being resolved. Yeah. And just a final kind of, screenshot comes up at the end saying he still hasn't managed to speak to the right people. So fundamentally, there are bits and bobs going on, but he said there's a Fair Banking Act in the States that basically makes banks have to give something like, a 500 quid loan at non-exorbitant rates, at really, really straightforward rates to people, and let them have accounts. I have to say, I did do a little Google on that just to see more about it. And then you end up, the rabbit holes beckon. Because the Fair Banking Act, the reason it's in the headlines at the moment is that was something used by the right to try to stop what they regard as woke debanking, where banks and other people were basically excluding law-abiding legal industries like firearms, ammunition, crypto, weirdly enough, federal prison contractors and energy producers. So you just think, right, so walk back towards the light. Right? Yes. America's very strange, but the point still remains. Here he is. He's done all of this. He's been at this for 2016. I mean, that's the best part of a decade. He's been trying to bang on about this. He's gone and spoken to, Gordon Brown, and it would seem that, he's talking to the hand still. So I hope I'm wrong about this and that somebody with some good intention in the middle of all of this, but it looks like there isn't.
Well, he's some boy, as Michael Sheen. Not only is a tremendous actor, but one of the other things I do know about him is he continually goes back to the public good in terms of the fact how he got into acting was through community groups that were well funded by local authorities, how he progressed as an actor, how he came from where he was to where he went to, making movies like The Damned United and Midnight in Paris. And that was, he said, it was all down to the fact of the collective good providing the pathway for working class actors like himself to make your way. And I compare and contrast, just to say that with Alexander Armstrong, who's been rattling on in the papers this week about how much he detests the Labour Party and Keir Starmer for putting VAT in public school fees, because he is now poverty-stricken because he's sending 4 of his kids to fee-paying school. Well, stop eating muesli. Cancel your Netflix.
Come on, there's nothing wrong with muesli now, Pat.
Cancel your Netflix subscription. Don't send your kids to fee-paying school. Send them a cheaper fee-paying school, Alexander. But then you dare come on here and moan about being poverty-stricken when real people are in poverty. I'm just intrigued, though, just one question about the documentary. How did the people who took part, did they blame themselves for being in debt? Was it all, did they see it as their fault? Was that part of it? Or was it just all these forces, external forces about lack of a proper paying job and electricity bills, gas bills?
There was one woman that was focused on a lot who had 2 jobs to try and sort of get by. She was the one with the £12,000 debt. And really, it's the rate at which any small loan that you've taken out for just getting by making it, she's saying the last week before payday is really, it's almost impossible. So you might just be tempted to get 200 quid to just try and get through all that week. That one, then, it doubles the next day, and then it just goes almost exponential depending on who you've approached. And there was a young chap, 17 or 18-year-old, who had managed to rake up several thousand quid on the basis of a £50 loan.
Jeez.
So it's the rate of it. You fall into this, and it's just, and the thing is, people who are living in estates and where unemployment is high will know this. It's not in a sense that people don't, with one part of their brain, know that they're not going to be different. But with no apparent alternatives, and probably with the use of loan sharks fairly normalised in certain communities, so everybody's sitting with £12,000 worth of debt somehow to a variety of people that they'll never be able to pay off. If everybody's doing that, it will probably seem like a pretty normal thing to do. But I should say, just to make the point, that in the end, he wrote off £1 million worth of debt for 900 people in South Wales.
Yeah.
And actually, fair play to him, because he said, it was kind of quite carefully said that it took him so long to do this because they had to not freak the markets and look like a legit company and everything. It was years from the beginning of this documentary to the end of it. And in that time, his own finances changed quite a bit. He didn't dwell on it, but he basically, he was effectively saying, this is making all the pips squeak. But he also didn't know the people that he was helping because data protection meant that he couldn't do. So, and there's also the chance that he's hoping that the program will alert people about this, because some people won't even realize their debts have been cancelled. And that's like the vast number of people who've just ignored the scary letters that come through the door, so that his company will just look like another scary letter. It'll look like you and your future and your life have now been passed to this other grim sort of set of reapers who are coming for you. Whereas actually it's saying, happy days, your debt's been cancelled, but they may never, the penny may not drop.
Yeah. Well, thanks for actually alerting me to it, because I was uneasy about watching it, because it felt like almost, I wondered if it was going to be, it was far more about the system and how people get dragged into it from what you've said, rather than, here's a philanthropist, Hollywood actor. Much as I respect him, going around distributing largesse.
But I think there was that tension in it, because they did have to. There was things that were slightly pointless, and you did look and think you're acting now. You know what I mean? Fair play. He is able to ham it up, but they got from the local council some vast empty building where he was able to sort of set up what looked like a kind of some sort of international drugs ring type little den in the middle of it, which was it was part of a sequence. They're trying to get stuff, trying to make it. The trouble was it began to make it look like a game. And I thought at that point he managed it all well, took the piss out of it, basically saying, oh, look, a lamp to sort of, shine on the people who come in. There's just no plug. There's just no electricity, and it was kind of punching a hole straight through the wall of illusion that the filmmaker, I think, was trying to make. So I thought there was a wee bit of tension there, actually, and I think it could have been done quite differently. But God love him, he went with it because at least he got these guys on board, and they must have stayed on board for about 3 years.
Well, talking about spooking the markets, Michael Sheen is worried about it. The Trump appears to have done the same, but it's not his fault by putting tariffs on. And the fall in the stock market, which he pays particular attention to, is not down to his economic policies and the potential impact on the US economy and the world economy, but it's all down to these filthy globalists. Countries and companies, out there who don't like the USA, don't like what he's doing, and have a vested interest on sucking the lifeblood of the US economy. It's these filthy globalists that are up to it. But it's been interesting to see what's been happening this week, because there's a lot of tension just now, both within the US cabinet. Not cabinet. Can I say, is Musk in the cabinet? Well, he appears to be, between Rubio and Musk, clashing about the Department of Doge coming in. And Rubio say you shouldn't be making cuts in AID. It should be me that's making the cuts in AID. Yeah, exactly. And you've got a March the 14th deadline for the adoption of a new spending bill. And there's going to be votes happening today, which is all very interesting, which I hope we do get into, because I think it shines a light on what's actually going on in the States, despite the fact that there's seeming to be this monolithic progress of the Trump machine to just take over the United States of America, roll over everyone, and Trump to run rampant for the next 4 years.
Yeah, I've been sort of noticing I don't know how widespread this is, and you'd have to say, I mean, said before, I think most progressive people in the world so want Trump to fall on his freaking face, and they want to see the signs of dissent. They want to see it all beginning to crumble and go wrong, and actually, we want to see it so badly. I'm actually seeing it in the glass of coffee in front of me here, so it's kind of, you've got to bear that in mind. However, there's a great guy, I'm not going to know if I get his name right, Scott Dworkin, I think I'm following, who has got seems to be at the centre of an action network that is going all over the place in sort of resistance to Trump. They're having rallies. It so reminds me of the Yes campaign, actually, because there's pictures of people, and maybe just 20 people out, but in absolutely freezing, appalling, deep snow weather, with their signs and everything in deepest snow-ridden Manitoba or whatever. So there's a suggestion that it's very, very action-oriented. This is it's called the Watchdog Coalition, and these guys are urging folk to sign up, make calls to Congress, send letters to Congress, be a digital organizer, attend events and rallies, monitor headlines, monitor video clips. I've got to say, there is a bit of a, hey, this is how to do it. So internally, there's that kind of, pushback going on. Externally, there's the Norwegians made the headlines at the weekend as well, because one company, Haltbach Bunkers, which is one of the largest suppliers of oil within Norway, posted on Twitter, "We have today been witness to the biggest shit show ever presented." This is their words, right? "Live on TV by the current American president. Huge credit to the president of Ukraine restraining himself and for keeping calm, even though USA put on a backstabbing TV show. It made us sick. Short and sweet, as a result, we have decided to immediately stop as fuel provider to American forces in Norway and all their ships calling at Norwegian ports. No fuel to Americans. We encourage all Norwegians and Europeans to follow our example. Slava Ukraina." So, I mean, that's quite something. I was looking then at a lot of the Norwegian press. There's quite a lot of debate about that. I mean, the Norwegian government has come in a kind of po-faced way and went, well, we'll still obviously have to make sure that our partners in blah, blah, or get fueled. But there was a pretty large ship shown having to sort of essentially retreat from Norway because of the prospect of not being sure whether we're going to get. Haltbach are the biggest fuelers of American ships in Norway. The Norwegians are also having a very active debate at the moment. This is coming back to where you get your money from, and this one should make every Scot bite the carpet so hard God. You'll need another set of teeth. Going. Yeah, that they could use the interest only. At the moment, they use 3% of their sovereign wealth fund, their oil fund. They use 3%. It gets transferred into their annual budget, because if they put more into it, they would basically screw up their economy big time. So they just take that amount of interest. So they're discussing raising it to 4%, maybe a bit more. That's a pretty active debate for them, because there's nothing that has made them vary that amount, except for a 0.5% variance in 2008 after the world financial crash. But there's now a set of something like 40 Norwegian economists arguing that the wealth fund should be really seriously raided to just give money to Ukraine. And I mean, this is they're not there yet, but it's the big argument that's happening in Norway at the moment. And many people are saying, the whole point of the oil fund was to safeguard future generations in Norway. And they're saying, just looking at the situation that they have, because they also have a land border, not a huge one, but still with Russia, the future of European democracy is integrally related to the safety and well-being of future generations. So all these economists are arguing that just giving money to directly, as well as using it for increased defence expenditure, which is, to be fair, currently low actually in Norway, they're also suggesting giving the dosh, a lot of dosh to Ukraine straight over. So, I mean, I'll keep an eye on that one, but at the moment, it hasn't actually reached having a debate in the Parliament about it. But with all the kind of energy there is behind it in the public, it's quite something.
Yeah, well, I did the same thing as you, Lesley. Look at the internal opposition towards Trump, and I think it's the same people, the Scottish Working Group that I was looking at, who've come up with what they call effective obstructionism, which was what the Republicans did under Mitch McConnell, which was that they used, particularly in the Senate, because what happens in the Senate is that you've got 100 senators, and if you filibuster, and I think we've all seen the movies where the senator stands up and reads some books of poetry and out-talks something, and the only way to defeat a filibuster is to actually have 60 of the 100 senators vote. So what McConnell and the Republicans did throughout the Obama era and throughout the Biden era was use this effective obstructionism to stop Biden and Obama getting things done. And what the external to the Democrats have been saying is, come on, guys, get your act together. Why don't you do this? Why don't you employ the tactics that the Republicans use so effectively to stymie Obama and Biden? And what they're saying to Schumer is, forget about the Congress, because I think it's 218 to 214. Schumer's trying to persuade Republicans of the Congress not to vote for this interim stopgap bill to stop the federal government shutting down. But he's trying to persuade Republicans to come over to the Democratic side. They say, forget that. Just go for the filibuster. Do what McConnell did. Because the Democrats are already discovering what's happening. And lo and behold, if you're a Democrat and the cuts are affecting something in your constituency, your neck of the woods, you go and you, as I say, as with Gordon Brown, etc., you're talking to the hand. Republicans, however, if they object to a cut that's taking place in their neck of the woods, guess what happens? They go and speak to Doge, they go and speak to the Republican leadership in the White House, and guess what? The cuts are stopped in their area. So, I mean, it suggests to me the Democrats should take the gloves off and have the balls that the Republicans did to stop the Democratic measures being put through the Congress. Do what the Republicans did. We'll wait to see if they will do it and will they have the guts to do it. But again, just on the basis of it, I have my doubts.
Yeah, well, do you remember last week I was mentioning this woman, Elisa Slotkin, who was going to do the response to Trump in his not State of the Nation address. This is the one that people might remember, the speech given, which was so childish and, you know, all of the usual. But it had all sorts of, you know, commentators are talking about the fractured approach of the Democrats in response to it, because some of them refused to attend. Some of them held up little ping pong paddles with messages on them, which this commentator said a silly idea that looked even worse in its execution. Others meandered out at sort of points. One guy, Al Green of Texas, got himself thrown out. Of course, a lot of people have then shown, and there's been videos of the same, I mean, screaming kind of stuff that was directed at Joe Biden when he was giving the similar address a long time ago. And if they were, you know, nothing, they were just tutted and allowed to sort of sit in their seats, screaming their heads off all the way through everything he said. However, you know, the general verdict seemed to be, here this is a quote from an observer, Slotkin's address suffered from the same half-heartedness that seized the Democrats since last November. They're saying that she was very measured, but they're saying she failed to capture the hallucinatory nature of our national politics. As in, people really want someone to come up with a Trump level of opposition, you know, and actually that's true in our own politics, where everybody's looking around for, you know, the big leader that's going to come out and really whack people over the head and actually do an equal and opposite to Nigel Farage is now looking like the guy that you have to kind of mirror back. I read an interesting thing by her, Slotkin, she's the one that won in a state her seat when the actual, the popular vote for president went to Trump. So she's very kind of worried about keeping it centrist, keeping those on board that you don't agree with and all the rest of it. But I mean, this is kind of hopeless. Somebody else had pointed out, if the Democrats were going to be offended by some of the stuff he said, they should have got up in a oneer and walked out. They should have done something that created a message that people could understand. And just while we're at it, there's also been an interview where your man Waltz, who was the deputy to Kamala Harris, was on a CNN interview. And, that's being a bit unwrapped now as to quite why he was on so little. The Washington Post had said that he was a surprisingly bubble-wrapped campaigner. And it's the focus seems to be on this same worry that, things are the Democrats are micromanaging stuff. They want people that are on message, that don't come out with words like weird, even when it's something quite memorable and seems fairly straight. Just this total worry about antagonizing the beast or the beast supporters, so that anything you say that's got content or character, personality or truth can just end up being weaponized by an opponent who will weaponize what you didn't say, anyway. So it just seems to me that the Democrats are still in a pretty poor place.
Well, as Jon Stewart used to say continually on his show, Bernie Sanders. That was we know what happens to populist leftist politicians. But one good piece of news, because I always find it, it is that hilarious thing hilarious unless you're living in the United States of America, where the complaints are constantly about, freedom of speech, we're for freedom of speech, we're for freedom of speech, the First Amendment. And then suddenly this guy, Mahmoud Khalil, a Palestinian student who's got a green card, he's at Columbia University, and I believe Trump's just removed, I think it's $300 or $400 million worth of federal funding for Columbia University, has been detained because of the claims that he was, I've got to read this, leading activities aligned with Hamas, a designated terrorist organization, whereas US law says you must not provide mutual support to terrorist organizations. And so you can drive a coach and horses through it. And what's happened is a federal judge has blocked the deportation. And there are strong rumours arising that his wife, who's 8 months pregnant, Khalil, who's a US citizen, that she was going to be deported as well. So that's going to be a test case because Trump claimed this was the first of many deportations there's going to be. So we await to see what happens there. I don't know if we go back to domestically, because this is a major issue, I think, for us here, was Ian Blackford, and I think Stuart MacDonald supported him in this, saying that the SNP should move from a unilateral position on disarmament and getting rid of nuclear weapons to a multilateral based upon, Trump's machinations and Trump's withdrawal, looks like, from NATO, that there should be, the SNP should actually move to a multilateral position, which was slapped down immediately by John Swinney, who said there'd be an orderly removal of Trident from Scotland. One of the things I found was that Blackford was saying he now favours a multilateral approach, but he wanted to remove Trident from Scotland, though. And I just wondered, how do you remove Trident from Scotland if we move to a multilateral position? And nobody's moving forward on multilateralism. But anyway.
This was a bit weird, actually, because I'm listening to a number of different debates. People were sort of suggesting that there would be disarmament by simply Scotland not becoming independent, and the successor state, which would be rest of the UK, it owns the kit, and there's precedent for this. The Soviet Union actually have Ukraine's. I think their nuclear weapons were, in that instance, worryingly can hold off to Russia. But so the precedent is pretty set, and I don't think anyone's arguing about that. That this is British kit. Now you could have a long bit of negotiation. However, people feel about the fact that we've been through this so many times, and there was somebody mentioning dear old Devonport again as a potential other base. And I mean, this argument just ebbs and flows, but every time it's done with any seriousness, the depth of water that you would want to have and all sorts of other considerations make it's going to be a different proposition to be in, the busy waters of Devonport. Not that the Clyde is an empty set of waters, however. So, as ever, there's all the swings and roundabouts of the fact that having Trident there essentially puts a target onto Glasgow. But it's a strange argument because, for sure, if we were to become independent and decide, have a referendum, I think, that would decide and have a proper discussion about what we want to do as defence policy in a sort of complete, holistic way, with the insight that would be gained at that time. If we decided we didn't want to house weapons and a weapons system, which, as has been conceded, actually depends on American servicing to operate. If we decided we didn't want to have that, then, it's absolutely free for the British to take it somewhere else and house it wherever they can. And you have to think poor benighted Wales would possibly look like another contender. But it's good in a way that this debate is happening because there's quite a lot of good, points being made. And I watched Debate Night, which, had a kind of Trident question came up pretty quickly, actually. And I thought, oh, God, here we go. But strangely enough, Alex Cole-Hamilton, didn't really expect this from him, sort of sitting on the fence, just proves that he's a Lib Dem and hasn't been abducted by aliens, but still. But he was kind of surprisingly anti-Trident, though then he got into quite a lot of, mealy-mouth words about multilateral, the need to kind of do multilateral disarmament. There was also Labour's Claire Baker, and I mean, they'd done the maths on her enough to know that she had basically been pretty massively anti-Trident and pro-CND. She's suddenly changed her mind in the same way that Ian Murray has done and is suddenly completely at one with the idea that, we've got to rearm Trident and blah, blah, blah. Jim Fairley was on. He was very strong. Pat Kane was in top form, actually, really, really good about the whole, just the kind of world we're casting ourselves in. And I've got to say as well that Prof. Lynn Jameson, who is the head of CND, was on a phone-in, a call K. I even listened to that for you. That was actually pretty good, and she really seemed to me to bring the thing down to the business of, when one of these things gets fired, it's the end.
Yeah.
And there was another chap on who I had to sort of flick back quite a number of times to get his name, Francis Tusa, who's a defence analyst, who sounded like, I've got to say, Francis, you won't be listening, but if you are, you sounded like a boy with toys. The voice that Lynn had with this was, the voice of a woman who's looking at the literally end game of all of this. And just all the, what will we be left with? What's the point of any of this? Really focusing on the destruction, all that stuff. And he came in swinging in with that kind of, well, let me tell you how this works. And we've got, 200 warheads and they've got 250 and so else. I mean, to be fair to the interviewer, she actually said, but if one warhead can do all this damage, why do we need 200? And there was a slight pause for a moment where he was basically saying, well, of course, some of them could be intercepted and shot down, and it's just always good to have some in reserve. I thought, there's just keep going, girl, because there's a lot more in there. And he was also challenged on this question of the use of the Americans for servicing. And precisely, he said, if America denied us access to their stockpile of nuclear missiles, after a few months, our weapons would start to develop problems. So the conclusion, it's time the UK got its own truly independent missile.
Yeah.
So that's like more expenditure. Yeah. So, if we're having this debate, really, can we just cut all the other, blah, and just cut straight to the chase of what these things are actually doing and able to do? Because we've just seen, okay, everyone could say, well, the Americans are never going to deny us access to, we're not Ukraine. We're not, our guys wear suits when they go in to speak to President Trump. I mean, that's what it's hinging on. And even guys who are completely unapologetic supporters of nuclear weapons, like Francis Tusa, actually conceded quite easily that America cannot be relied upon, and the future has got to be the UK spending billions, maybe it gets into trillions, I don't know, to develop its own truly independent missile.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I look back on this because, I mean, I'm a member of CND. That I'm going to be upfront about that. We're technically and politically utterly dependent on the United States of America. You said for the servicing, the technical backup. And I looked at the Defence Select Committee said, in a crisis, the very existence of the UK Trident system will make it difficult for a UK Prime Minister to refuse a request by the US President to participate in an attack. So the very fact of it could be independent, doesn't matter. The very fact we've got it, but it is utterly dependent on the United States of America. The costs are mind-boggling. The Audit Office said the costs have overrun by over 38 billion over the last year. 4 new subs, 31 billion minimum plus 10 billion contingency. The Nuclear Information Service saying the full costs over the time period would be 172 billion. The MOD says 118 billion to replace the nukes over the next 10 years. That's 8 billion more than Treasury forecasts. So while we're cutting, to get back to it, while we're cutting 5 billion off personal independence payments, we're lashing out money on a nuclear system that's technically dependent, politically dependent on the United States of America. And if we actually separate, as the French did, and Macron is suggesting, of course, there should be an independent European nuclear deterrent. And as the US position continues, that the French will provide that nuclear umbrella, the UK is currently tied to it. If we went on our own, God knows what the costs would be. So, yeah, on an economic and, more importantly, a moral basis, Trident ain't worth it.
And if people, I mean, if anybody will still be, well, if the possession of nuclear weapons is all that stops us from Armageddon, via Putin, there was just one line that Pat Kane had in that debate night. Putin invaded Ukraine despite Trident.
Yeah, that's it. Cuts through.
I mean, I know it's it is it's a decision and a debate and everything else, but it's just there's a sort of people are scared of questioning any of this stuff, and yet actually when you look at all the opinion polls, 70% of Scots regularly, I'd be interested to see where we are with it after what's happened lately, are opposed to Trident's renewal. So it's about framing debates. That's where people are with it. And I mean, I'm sure that this will, given what we talked about before and the linkage between the enthusiasm for nuclear power amongst the Labour Party and the nuclear weapons industry, it's above my pay grade to kind of try and figure it all out. But there's just an awful lot that seems extremely fishy about this whole enthusiasm for nuclear.
Yeah, well, I mean, I still stick with the old phrase, bairns not bombs, and let's have a properly funded conventional military defence force in an independent Scotland that suits our needs, and so we can contribute that way.
But at the same time as all of this, I mean, still, because I know people that are living in other countries in Europe, and I'm sure a lot of people listening are having the same. There's huge debates now about the expectation of conscription and changed lives and trying to get your boys out in case that they can get out of the country before conscription begins in some places. I have a friend in the Netherlands who was apparently given instructions from the government to have basically a survival kit at hand. I mean, I find that quite mind-blowing, but I mean, there's no reason to doubt her. So as ever with these things, when I was at a recent event, a lot of people were talking about having sort of support circles for people who now can hardly sleep. So it's kind of like, this is, we are sitting on because of that bit of water over there, we are separated and our history from the first throes of what happens. And, our borders have remained fairly intact as a set of islands, whereas many of the countries in mainland Europe have had borders that came and went quite regularly. and are very conscious of kind of what happens next. So this is where us not being in the EU is, again, such a freaking disaster, or any kind of EFTA, just so that we don't have this argument. I'm joining virtually an interesting event tomorrow, a Brussels event at EFTA. But the point is that even inclusion in anything that brings you into the thinking and constraints accepted by European partners gets you thinking European and, what's really happening in the mainland. And things really are changing, really hugely. And we're still not getting, okay, I don't watch BBC News anymore, so I don't know what they're reporting. But we need to get back to if the Germans and all sorts of other people are now creating different fiscal means to change the shape of their economies, I think we kind of need to know about that.
Yes. Whew. Well, it's a momentous day in Greenland today. I know we're running. It's been a lengthy one again. We seem to be. I remember the days when it was half an hour, it was 40 minutes. Then it linked up to an hour. We're running about an hour and 6 minutes just now. But again, I think it's important. We'll probably discuss the result of the Greenland elections next week. But just to say, it's the Greenland elections today. There's 41,000 voters, 31 members of the parliament. I'm not going to attempt the pronunciation. And that's the Startot, so I did. PR, of course, 6 main parties, and I think 4 out of the 6 support independence in different timeframes. And there's the nuances that seem to exist, Lesley. You'll know more about it, is whether after Trump's intervention, there'll be more, as I say, gung-ho for independence immediately from Denmark, take our time for independence from Denmark, or will there be a swing to actually suggest the fact that given these perilous international times, sticking with a closer relationship with the Kingdom of Denmark might be a smart idea?
Yeah, it seems to be. It's hard to track this, partly because Greenland, as you said, there's 41,000 voters. There's only 57,000 people. I don't know. I keep thinking about Pennycook. What size is that? But, it's small. So there's only 2 newspapers there. And as is the case very often with Scotland, what we have, nearly 6 million people, and we don't have enough to warrant having constant opinion polling. Well, an island with 57,000 people and 2 newspapers doesn't do a lot of opinion polling. So it's hard to know where people are exactly on all of this, really, But there's definitely seems to have been a hardening of general, attitudes towards the Americans. There's nobody seeming to want to go, oh, actually, if Trump was going to give us millions, that would put me 100,000 quid the right way. So they're now talking just about, it's almost an inevitability about becoming independent. But the thing is that the way that the Danes have been doing it with the Faroese and the Greenlanders is that when you want to take on new powers, you can do that when you choose to do it. You just have to then take on paying for them.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, it's not like people are thinking, oh, my God, here's a moment we can make it. It's one great bust. We can get everyone with us and we can get over the top. They know they can go, essentially when they want to, when they're able to get their economy together. That's got all the difficulties that. Despite the fact they've got these rare earth minerals, they haven't been massively exploited for all the reasons discussed before. Greenland is not a walk in the park. It's probably the toughest terrain there is in the world to be able to do anything. And the Americans know that because by gum, they tried. So at the moment, there's 2 big mines. One of them is owned by the Chinese. And it's a bit like the kind of problems Scotland will unquestionably have upon independence, when we have so many assets in the energy field, but they're all privately owned. So Greenland's got to try and figure out how it can crank up its economy without being overwhelmed, hang on to its assets, develop them with investment that isn't coming with so many strings attached from America or China or any of them that basically, it ends up in hock to them. And it takes quite a lot. There's got to be some real canniness in there about how to manage all of it. At the same time, it looks like they're going to have some sort of defense treaty with everybody, the Danes, the Canadians, the Americans. So all of that has been discussed. But yeah, as you say, we'll see more about it next week when we've got the result.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to move on to matters cultural, just to round things off, and hopefully on a slightly lighter note. I mean, I went to see the new Bong Joon-ho movie. Bong Joon-ho, the guy who won Best Oscar Picture for Parasite, the one that made Donald Trump say when it was awarded, "What the hell was that about? Can we get back to Gone with the Wind, please?" And I thought, Gone with the Wind. So something's going through my head. Gone with the Wind, Gone with the Wind. That was the one about the US Civil War, wasn't it? Yeah, yeah. And Hattie McDaniel was the first African American to win an Oscar. Yes, she was. She won it for Best Supporting Actress for playing Mammy, the maid. And I love the quote about that, when she says, "Yes, I do realise I'm reinforcing racist stereotypes, but I'd rather be paid £700 a week for acting as a maid than $7 a week for actually being one." And brilliant. But what she did, and there you go, Donald, back to the good old days of Gone with the Wind, where Hattie McDaniel sat at a segregated table at the back of the hall when the awards were being given out. But Mickey 17 by Bong Joon-ho has a bravura performance. Oh, God, I've forgotten the guy's name now. He plays the Hulk in the Marvel movies, which is absolutely of no benefit to me whatsoever at this precise moment, because I didn't write his name down. So I thought, I know his name perfectly. Well, he plays Donald Trump. And it's a science fiction movie which is absolutely weird, off the charts, strange.
It's not Mark Ruffalo, is it?
Mark Ruffalo. Thank you. Gee whiz.
It isn't. I'm able to Google while you're speaking, so don't think my memory's any better than yours.
You could have deluded me into that thinking, well done, knowing Mark Ruffalo. But brilliant. Who's been an outspoken progressive voice and left of centre voice in the States over many, many issues. Gives a bravura performance as this Trump-like politician who takes people into outer space, and it's all about printing replicas of people who are the expendables, who go out and carry out all these experiments for the benefit of mankind and settling a new planet which they discover life forms on. And one of the key points is that one of it is he says, "Let's destroy the aliens," to which the female protagonist says, "No, they're not aliens. We're the aliens." So I thoroughly recommend it to you if you're into strange. But sticking with the cultural, you were at an event, I think, was it Elaine C. Smith? Was she given the freedom of the city of Glasgow?
Indeed she was, and only the fourth woman ever to get it, or fifth perhaps. The last woman awarded that was in 1969, during which time there's been about 100 guys. So, I mean, there's definitely a kind of issue there. And it was a tremendous swally. I mean, pure dead Glasgow as well. It's just the surreal thing, actually. If you've ever been in the Glasgow City Chambers, unbelievably opulent inside, with the marble staircases and rooms and, the grandeur. And as we're coming in, there's all that sort of grandeur as you're kind of coming up into it. And then this kind of raucous laughter from the top floor, because, it was Elaine C. Smith's pals, basically. So they're all loud, shall we just say. And it was a great event. But there was one thing that struck me about it. Helena Kennedy, who's one of Elaine's good pals, or Baroness Helena, as she is indeed, did a sort of tribute thing to Elaine, and actually sort of described her as a lifelong feminist, socialist and nationalist. Now, that to me was actually quite a good thing, because obviously Helena is a Labour peer. And it's just this acknowledgement that somebody who is very publicly associated with the cause of independence, that it actually exists in their life, is something which struck me as not being present in an interview that Brian Cox, that'll not be the kind of planetary Brian, but the independency Brian, the succession Brian, the Dundonian Brian Cox. He is starring in a play about Johann Sebastian Bach in London at the moment, or Bach as everybody seems to call it, south of the border. Anyway, there was an interview between him and Krishnan Gurumurthy on Channel 4 that went into, what he thought of Bach and all the rest of it. It's a very highly acclaimed play. It's being kind of, its next stop is apparently going to be Broadway. So he's doing offy wheel with it. But in the description of it, just as, the penultimate question, it was saying, but, looking a little bit about your politics, you're a well-known socialist, you're a bit of a lefty, and you're just waiting, and you're a huge independence supporter, and it wasn't there. And it just, how we got to this stage now, I mean, okay, I'm sure probably, Guru Murthy was looking at the likely people coming to a play in the West End of London, probably don't give a toss about anything beyond their own parish and won't be interested in his politics about independence. And perhaps he felt that mentioning that would sort of open up something that they, is a big kind of, will look to them like a big rabbit hole. It's just accurate. To kind of go halfway into somebody's pedigree, if you like, and the things that they've become affiliated to in their lifetimes, and decide there's one bit that you're just going to kind of like delete because of whatever it is, looks so poor to a Scottish audience, half of whom support independence, just by the way. And when I was just thinking of you talking about Gone with the Wind there, this was my mother's favourite movie, and her favourite saying of everything in life was just that last saying by Scarlett O'Hara, "Tomorrow is another day." And you've got to hope that's where we are actually, with all of the horrible machinations there have been lately because of, Donald Trump. We will get ourselves organised, and tomorrow is another day.
Right. And on that note, we will see you next week, chums.